What's up, faithless? This is that's what I'm calling the fans, the faithless. What up, faithless? This is Virgil, Texas. With me, as always, via Zoom from the Chaos Cube, Brianna Joy Gray.
Virgil, this is just like when we're trying to name the podcast, and I, in all of my uncoolness, wanted to call it Good Faith, and now you're here wanting to call our followers faithless, and I would prefer to call them the faithful.
The faithful? Okay, that is cuter. You're right. The faithless is like, I don't know, if we were like the damned or something.
Right.
It's like that's what we'd call our fans.
I mean, honestly, in the time of COVID, I understand that most of us are feeling more faithless than faithful, but isn't part of the effort here to give people direction and make them feel like there's a path to rally around?
Yes, you're right. They should have faith. They should be the faithful, and they should have faith in us. Okay, they're the faithful. All right, disregard what I said about being the faithless. You're the faithful.
Up to this week, what news items have managed to capture your attention despite being so admirably offline?
I have not been in this reality for the past 96 hours, so you're gonna have to fill us in on the news.
All right, okay. So one thing that caught my eye was the fact that Joe Rogan on his podcast recently said that he would be open to hosting a presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump retweeted this, saying that he would be 100% down for this 4-hour debate. Because, that's the style of a Joe Rogan interview. He does these long kind of probing.
They're long.
I don't want to say meandering because that's a kind of negative connotation, but he lets the interview go where it goes. And, people were excited about this across the ideological spectrum with a notable absence of excitement in the middle.
Okay. So even from the Biden campaign, they're not excited for this one.
Right. I mean, I think that most liberals, the association that they have with Joe Rogan is that he's kind of a far right-wing bigot, which even if you don't agree, I certainly don't agree with everything that he says or his political positions. I think that those who listen to this show regularly have a very, or even who have listened at all, have a very different understanding of the kind of rhetoric that comes out of the Rogan show as compared to what's the guy who takes all the steroids? Who sells muscle stuff?
A guy who takes all the steroids.
Yeah, like the main guy. He's really loud and he screams and he...
Mark McGuire?
No. Like, it's not that oblique a reference. I just can't think of anybody's name ever as we established
Alex Jones?
last week. Alex Jones.
He doesn't take the steroids. He takes nootropics.
Excuse me. So sorry.
He takes nootropics, which are they're not steroids. They're like steroids for the mind.
And it wasn't just that my weight loss accelerated. My muscle mass increased. My stamina, my energy levels exploded. Super Male has the key concentrated natural compound.
Okay, well, he's no Alex Jones, but I think in the liberal mind eye, that's exactly what he's like.
Yeah.
So there people have poo-pooed this idea immediately. I saw one popular MSNBC commentator and writer of Above the Law say, well, I think I should host the debates. I have very many Ivy League degrees, and I think that would be good for it, as though that's a qualification. I saw some other people, though, Virgil, putting forward some names on the left, including our names as folks who could be competent hosts for this.
We could run a debate. We can, and we should host a debate. We would be good at it. Like, we've seen the debates, so we get the gist of it. We get the gist of what the questions would be. We can imitate the sounds of people like George Stephanopoulos or Tim Russett.
What sounds would those be, Virgil? What's your George Stephanopoulos impression?
Oh, doing my best George there. I'm not doing it. I can't do it, George. I'm sick as hell, by the way, so I cannot. I'm not 100% functioning. Yes, and I need everyone's sympathy. I need everyone to make that noise. But no, we can ask the questions. It's like, what are you going to do about the deficit? That kind of crap. We'll ask the important questions.
But what is your actual pitch, though, right? Because part of the excitement around the idea of a Joe Rogan type or even a, bad faith type of questioning is that you're not going to get the same old, and that you might actually get the kind of questions that are revealing about what the person's real life agenda is, what their private positions are. And Joe Rogan, I think why he's so popular is that he's I'm not going to say he's got the best bullshit detector in the world, because there are definitely some people who come on a show and say some things that don't get challenged in the way that they should. But he has called BS on a lot of folks, including Joe Biden in the past and including Donald Trump.
He's hard to flim-flam, you know? Like, you can sneak some stuff by him with some fancy talk if he's just not paying attention or doesn't give a shit. But when he, like, starts focusing on what you're saying and realizes, oh, this is a lot of bullshit, he'll just say, oh, this is a lot of bullshit.
Right. Or you might, if you use a word that he doesn't know and he asks you to define it, you are going to have to offer up a definition and not just stumble around the definition of the word toady, like poor Bari Weiss found herself having to do recently.
No, she's an Assad toady.
What does that mean?
She is
What's a toady?
I think that I used that word correctly. Jamie, can you check what toady means?
Rogan has some shitty guests on his show. He's a lot of shitty guests on. Like, whatever, that's his show. But he's not an all-right guy. Like, he's plainly not a fucking Nazi. He endorsed Bernie.
Yeah, and the reason wasn't because Bernie went right. It was because Joe Rogan believes in Medicare for all and legalizing marijuana.
Because Bernie sold him on it. Bernie was like, oh, all this shit makes sense. Yeah, to me, a guy who has a podcast and does a lot of drugs, this makes great sense. That's how universal Bernie's message is.
So
that's like going everyone from casino workers in Las Vegas to guys who podcast in their garage and do a lot of DMT.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point, right? That's kind of the appeal. There is this, I think, belief among liberals that the reason that we can't have nice things is because they're unpopular. When in fact, all of these policies are overwhelmingly popular, many of which are actually popular with a majority of Republicans. And the real reason that we don't have them is because of the influence of money in politics, and people are being paid not to support these positions. And that's a big issue for Joe Rogan, right? So I, for one, would be really interested in hearing anyone, whether it's Rogan or someone else, be willing to ask those kinds of questions about why these candidates don't support positions that are overwhelmingly popular. The problem is we don't get questions like that because they don't advantage either political party, right? So liberal hosts and conservative hosts alike who are rooting for their person over the other, the gap between the candidates is so narrow that it doesn't help either side distinguish their candidate, even though it helps American people understand what's going on immensely.
I'd want to get at fundamental questions too. I'd want to ask Trump, do you think you're a good person? I just want to know. I just want to know like what his conception of morality is, because you're getting a crazy answer, and like that's what we're all listening to Trump for. Like, what's he gonna say next? What's gonna be the crazy thing? And I think we can tailor very good questions to get very crazy answers.
Are you a good person? Maybe what makes a good person in your eyes?
What makes a good person? Yes. What makes a good person? Is a good person a moral person? And what makes a moral person?
Okay.
I'd want to ask those. I want to ask like ethics 101 questions to Trump and just see where he goes, because he went to business school.
Wait, what's that supposed to prove?
I don't know. I assume you take a class in ethics at some point. Actually, maybe not.
Do you? I don't know.
I don't know what the hell they do in business school. I know it's a huge scam. I know it's all bullshit. So maybe you don't actually take classes. Maybe you don't actually do anything. Maybe you just pay a lot of money and then you get a degree and you get to say you went to business school.
All I ever heard from the kids in law school who did JD MBA programs was how stressed out they were about how expensive every social event was in business school. So like normally if you have a school dance or something, a social event, a party or whatever, you would expect to pay what, like $5, $10, $15 at the door or something?
I guess.
Enough to cover like drinks and streamers or what have you. Yeah. I was in section with this one girl, Chinese American, relatively recent immigrant, and her mind was blown, as was mine, because they would be like, okay, the semester trip is going to be in Italy. You got to pay $800 for this party, plus your plane fare and all this other kind of stuff. She's like, I literally just can't afford to go to these things. And that's a large part of what business school is. It's the networking. It's the bonding with these people at these kinds of events.
Yeah, it's all networking. That sucks. That's like if every one of your friends had a travel wedding.
Yeah.
And you just felt and like you have to pay your own way. And like that's every event you can go to is your friend's fucking wedding in the Himalayas.
Right. Except this is also happening when you're not actually working because you're still in school, just racking up debt. It's a scam. It sounded really stressful.
Oh, it's a scam, and it's like it's good to know that they can't hang. Like they cannot hang. You can't just like go to someone's house and drink some beers. Like no, you got to go to Italy to drink some beers.
Is there though an issue area that you think just doesn't get covered? Because I know during the primary, the most frustrating thing about the debate hosts was that they offered up right-wing talking points and really drilled Bernie and other progressives on this stage, Elizabeth Warren and even like Marianne Williamson, Bill de Blasio for a second there, on how they're going to pay for Medicare for all. Heavy implication being that it was an impractical program. And no one was ever asked, how are you going to pay for the healthcare system as is? How are you going to address a potential pandemic or a healthcare crisis like the kind we're living in now? What are you going to do about people who are laid off and aren't able to access their employer-based healthcare insurance, right? Now that there's no one in the race who believes in any of those things, I feel a little less invested in who the questioner is.
Okay, we're going to do a debate. It's going to be the bad faith debate, the bad faith first presidential debate, and we'll invite all the candidates. We'll invite Biden and Trump, and we'll see what they say. I mean, Trump might do it. Trump might say he'll do it just to like tease Biden because he's just like a sassy guy. Biden won't do it, of course, but we'll invite Jo Jorgensen, the libertarian candidate, who would come. Honestly, I think she would come.
Oh, of course, all of the third party candidates would take the opportunity for visibility in a heartbeat.
And Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate, and like that's interesting. Okay, that would be that. If only those two came, it would be an interesting conversation, and I think it would be worthwhile for us to do. And it's like, okay, I would like to hear the libertarian justification for a lot of things. I'd like to hear the Green Party argument, which is like the only kind of left position of the candidates remaining. And of course, we have to invite Kanye. Kanye West has to come. Like he's giving us the star power.
Unironically, that would be a useful panel of questioners. Unironically, I almost feel like having someone who's extremely far right, have like Pat Robertson and the ghost of Strom Thurmond on one side, and I don't know who's a far radical leftist. Maybe it is just us.
Yeah, it's just us. It's us.
I mean, that's the thing. There's all of this talk about left-wing extremism, and even Democrats, right? They refer to Democrats, really, as the extreme left. But I can't name a person who would embody the kind of truly, like, radical ideals that you can find on the far right. But that doesn't stop the slurs coming from the people who are supposed to represent us.
I think we just got to do it. I think we got to do it. And let's make the pitch right now.
Okay.
If you're listening to this and you are Joe Biden's campaign manager, or you're Jared Kushner, or you are just Howie Hawkins and Jo Jorgensen, you're listening to this. If you're like Kanye West's manager or wife or whatever, if you're in the circle, if you're in the inner circle, email us at badfaithpodcast@gmail.com and we'll set it up. We will pick a date, and like that works for all 7 of us, and we'll get together and we'll have a debate. Brie and I will put on a show. We'll put on a debate. There'll be music. We'll have questions. We'll have like special video questions, stuff like that. We'll have like a rando asking a question, that kind of thing. We could dial a random phone number and let whoever picks up just ask a question.
We're only going to play early aughts Kanye.
Early aughts Kanye. Well, no, that's a little biased. You can't play Kanye because that's biased. Unless if you play him, then like everyone, we have to play everyone's music. Like we have to play Howie Hawkins'
music. Okay, all right.
Have to play Howie Hawkins like folk music or whatever.
4 years ago, Jill Stein very famously, not so famously, but she had a folk band that Samantha Bee decided to vote an entire show to mocking when she could have been, turning out votes for Hillary Clinton. So that was a good use of time.
Well, that's just me. I mean, nobody made fun of Beto's frickin' college alt-rock band.
Nobody. Absolutely nobody.
Nobody was on, but the crooked media, the biased media, they were not on that story. So there you have it. We're going to do a debate. All the candidates are going to be there. It's going to be great. All the friends. And we're going to get to the bottom of who the best candidate is. By the end of the night, we're getting to the bottom of it.
We forget to ask people this, Virgil, but people should subscribe and also leave a comment on iTunes. And you should leave in your comment your recommendation for the questions you think that we should ask at this prospective panel, at this prospective debate.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, rate us 5 stars.
5 stars.
Don't rate, even if you think we're 4 stars, just rate us 5 stars.
Because you have to make
It's,
up for the K-Hive onslaught that's been happening.
we're getting cyberbullied by the K-Hive.
Also,
and
Virgil,
it's
you were telling me that apparently they're coming for us on Reddit as well. They won't let us have a Reddit page. What's that about?
Oh, okay, all right. Here's some breaking news. So there's a Reddit there. I made a Reddit for this show. It was like Reddit, like Bad Faith Pod subreddit, and someone else made like a fan made a subreddit, like it's like Reddit Bad Faith Podcast subreddit, and like people started joining them. People started like joining them and posting on them, and Reddit immediately deleted both of them. Over the weekend. They deleted both of them with no warning and no explanation.
So what's the
And
deal?
I-
Are there no rules about
So-
this? Are there no platform standards?
Well, I had asked this guy who was a mod of the Chapo subreddit. It was like a really nice guy. He was like good to talk to. He was like one of the good zookeepers there at the Chapo subreddit. And I asked him if he wanted to like help set up this subreddit. Because, of course, the Chapo subreddit had like 100,000 subscribers, subredditors, and was deleted by Reddit a few months ago as they deleted the Donald Trump subreddit. And the theory is, and this was no explanation either, but the theory is that they deleted the Chapo subreddit as a way to save face for deleting the Donald Trump subreddit, which was just like straight Nazi stuff.
Wait, so I don't understand the equivalency there. Are they saying that
it's
Chapo
like-
is that as powerful as the president of the United States, that your influence is as far-reaching and grave?
It's saying, well, they're saying that, we're not biased against the conservatives because we're also deleting a left-wing subreddit.
So what does that what does that mean?
So
for us?
we were the sacrificial. The Chapo subreddit was the sacrificial lamb there. It was the scapegoat. What it means for us, well, so I asked this guy from the Chapo subreddit to mod this one, and he said, "Oh yeah, sure, I'm gonna get some like mods and like we'll like set it up." And then he tells me, "Oh, they deleted it. Maybe it's because Chapo mods were associated with it, and they're like, oh, okay, we're just gonna delete any subreddit that these guys make." But that doesn't explain why they deleted the other subreddit.
So do
So
we
it's
need
essentially-
people who are like not affiliated with us to like do the solid of making one organically?
Well, no, because somebody else did it.
And they took
That I
that one
don't-
down too?
Yeah, and they took that one down too, and I don't know who that is.
See, this is cancellation, and we need Barry Weiss
This is cancel
and Thomas
culture.
Chatterton Williams and everyone else to rally around this critical cause.
Where's Ben? Alert the Ben Shapiro. Call up, summon Ben.
We should have
Get him
all
on
three
it.
of them on the show at the same time to discuss the miscarriage of justice that's been done here.
It is screwed up. It's, I guess the Reddit message here is like anything associated with this podcast or with me and Brianna or frankly with the left is just going to be deleted.
And don't drag me into this. Do you think that I have something to do with it?
Well, you're in this. You're deep. You're deep in this.
I just feel
You're
like
deep in
I'm
this.
friendly. I'm friendly fire. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like a casualty of war.
Well, I feel like I'm friendly fire too. I didn't harass anyone on Reddit, so I don't know what this is about. Well, anyway, look, we got to raise Cain about this. Frankly, we can't let Reddit get away with this.
I think you're right. And so hopefully the online hordes that apparently we're associated with will rally in our defense and make a last stand of sorts on Serena Williams's Reddit. That's
Serena Williams' subreddit.
That's-
That's where everyone needs to congregate.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying because she's married to the Reddit guy. I'm trying to say that like
Is she?
yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Virgil.
I didn't know that.
No, like she's married to him. He's at all of her matches. Like this was supposed to be. I'm making an appeal to a fellow traveler, to someone I've long admired. This is supposed to be a space that welcomes and uplifts Black voices like my own, right?
Hell yeah.
And this is a real miscarriage of justice, and so I want to make an appeal to Serena Williams Reddit as opposed to what's his name? Olympia. What's the Reddit guy's name? I forget.
I don't know the Reddit guy.
Mr. Serena Williams.
Mr. Serena Williams.
To making a
Williams.
direct appeal to the real heart and soul of the matter to restore our rights on Reddit.
Does everyone do this?
What?
Is the Serena Williams subreddit just full of people complaining about Reddit policy and begging Serena Williams to talk to her husband?
There is a Serena Williams subreddit. I think the kind of people who like tennis and care about Serena Williams are too wholesome and too filled with vitamin D and sunshine to be on Reddit.
There's this long list of rules in the Serena Williams subreddit that's just stop asking Serena Williams to ask her husband to unban you from Reddit. Stop doing that. This is for tennis. This is for tennis and Serena Williams related information.
I mean, unless it works.
Unless it works. I mean, if it's worth a shot. I think if you're a journalist, if you're a real journalist, then you should write a story about this. You should contact Reddit and ask why they're deleting subreddits based on new lefty podcasts.
I mean, it is a speech issue. As much as we joke about cancel culture, this, that, and the other, I mean, I think our first trial episode, Virgil, as you will recall, we recorded in the midst of all of that cancel culture stuff over the summer. And we have nuanced, complicated feelings about it because more often than not, it's better to take discrete example by discrete example instead of trying to overgeneralize about there being a culture one way or the other. But discrete examples are aplenty of all kinds of overreach and genuine concern we should be having about people's speech rights on these platforms that are being policed in these really idiosyncratic ways. So we'll see how it pans out.
Well, it's a real thing because, my complaint with the Chapo subreddit was, I like the Chapo subreddit. My complaint with it was that it's Reddit, and so it's full of, Reddit losers. That's the part of it I didn't like. The fact that it was in my honor is, of course, the part that I love. That was a good thing. And it's unfair that, ban the Trump people. Yeah, screw them. They're Nazis. But banning us, that is malarkey. Because you look at everywhere else on Reddit, and it's awful. All the other losers get to have their Reddit. Our losers deserve a Reddit. That's my position. And they are being discriminated against.
And if by our losers, you mean our faithful winners.
Our faithful, the faithful, who also go to patreon.com/badfaithpodcast to subscribe. We're also going to make a Discord. Once I figure out how to do that. You like that. You kids love that. Okay.
So, Virgil, in slightly less mercenary news, there are real things in the world that also require us to get angry and our humors raised about it, our heckles raised, our humors heated, whatever. Have you read about this story? I've been following the story, rather, about the homeless shelter on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, the Upper West Side. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who haven't been following, there was a hotel on the Upper West Side where hundreds of homeless men were placed to give them shelter, obviously, particularly during the midst of COVID, where obviously being outside it raises everybody's risk and it's a vulnerable population. Well, the affluent neighbors who lived nearby raised a NIMBY firestorm about this, in what is considered to be one of the more liberal but very Tony parts of New York. There were neighbors who were saying they should smear dog feces on benches so that homeless people couldn't sleep there, who were advocating for folks to get wasp spray to deter folks from coming around. And this guy who's the deputy mayor to Rudy Giuliani, Randy Mastro, has been the advocate for all of the members of the neighborhood in getting these homeless people removed. And they are in fact being relocated. What's really an interesting twist that I found out recently is that Randy Mastro is on the board of a Legal Aid Society. I think the largest legal services organization that basically provides counsel to all kinds of people, including just indigent defense in the city. So people who can't afford counsel, including tenants attorneys, people who are defending housing rights. So here's a guy on the board of one of the foundations that gives the most to housing rights advocacy in New York, being the face of this protest movement to evict large numbers of homeless people from the Upper West Side. It doesn't get any better than that.
It's really amazing, these Upper West Side NIMBYs who think that this small section of the island of Manhattan can be a gated community.
Yeah.
You can have gated communities in the suburbs. You can have just explicit racist policing in the suburbs and get away with that. This is a city where people move around.
Yeah,
you know.
and all the discourse about, oh, everyone's fleeing New York because of COVID. One, I'm not seeing it. I'm certainly not, as someone who's looking to move back to the city, seeing it reflected in any of the real estate prices. But even if it were, when things like this are happening, it's hard to feel a lot of sympathy for the folks who have the resources and are making that kind of a choice to evacuate.
Yeah. I flagged this one thing from the article. There's the article in Gothamist about Upper West Siders for Safe Streets, the Facebook group of all these rich psychos. This is a comment from a guy named Jared Long Hitano. I think at this point, if anyone sees anyone doing this behavior, the person witnessing it should run up to them while they're squatting and start kicking them as hard as they possibly can. Maybe if people start being super aggressive and act very violently, these vagrants will stop, or at least realize they may get attacked. And I don't mean just kick. I mean kick with bad intentions and the intent to injure. Kick them in front of a bus if possible. That is a sociopath. That is an absolute sociopath. I Googled this guy.
Yeah.
And because I want to find out if he was like a fucking Democrat or if he was Rudy Giuliani's in his cabinet. Here's this guy's deal. He's a one-time member of this is from the Post. He's a one-time member of the New York City Ballet's Young Patron Circle and was accused in a lawsuit from a student dancer against the ballet company of sending a text to her ex-boyfriend suggesting that they tie up girls so they can abuse them like farm animals. These are like teenagers, and he was a member of the patron circle. Like this is a sick individual. Like this is who you're dealing with when you see these anti-homeless, these violent, deranged NIMBY people.
The saying is it takes all kinds, but really it just takes one kind.
It takes one kind.
Yeah,
I don't really. I mean, it's a disgusting story. It's a gruesome story, and there's a lot of people in the Upper West Side who are organizing for the homeless shelter,
Absolutely.
and that's great.
Not all Upper West Siders.
Not all Upper West Siders. That's right. There are some like nice people there who are just like there by virtue of rent control, basically, who are paying like $400 a month for a 17th floor 3-bedroom. Like they count their blessings. They're not on the boards of any ballet companies. Fantasizing about tying up fucking teenage ballerinas. Jesus.
Well, speaking of dance, I'm really excited about the dance we're about to do with a number of very talented and esteemed panelists in a few minutes.
I am too. I'm delirious. I was thinking, are we throwing a ball? That's wonderful. That's great. What am I going to wear? I can't wait.
A mask.
It'll be a mask ball.
It'll be a mask ball.
Okay. Tell you what. Let's go to our panel. Do you want to just introduce us? Because you were doing great with that introduction.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I mean, I can do that. Sure. I mean, look, I'm a very inexperienced host. Okay, but I'll try my best.
I just want to hear your take.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Virgil, Texas, that you're seeing on your screen right now. You saw Osita earlier. We are live doing the first ever live taping of the Bat Faith podcast with Brianna Joy Gray and Virgil, Texas. And I'm one of their guests. They were foolish enough to have me on, along with much more intelligent people such as Osita and Meagan Day. So, take it away, Virgil and Brie.
Sure, that is Osita Nwanevu, who's a writer at The New Republic. Meagan Day, who's writer and editor at Jacobin magazine. And Hasan Piker, who is a Twitch streamer.
It's a real who's who of the alt-left.
The far left.
We're not calling ourselves that. We're not.
We're the radical Joe Biden supporters.
Okay, so the first thing we wanted to do today, by the way, I'm sick, so no one can be mad at me. The first thing that we're going to do today was go over something that people have been talking about for the past couple weeks, and there's with like increasing intensity, is whether or not the election will be stolen.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election.
Whether or not, what are the possible scenarios where Republicans will just steal the election before our very eyes, or what if Trump doesn't leave? And like, there's a lot of I think a lot of fraidy cat stuff going around, but there is as well a lot of truth to this. And when Brie and I were setting this up, She was like, I don't really know this whole electoral college crap. And I said, I
exactly
do.
in those terms.
And I said, well, I know it, kind of. I get the gist of it, and I assume the rest of you do too. So I was thinking, just to lay the groundwork of this, we'll play a game. I'm going to explain this entire process, but I'm going to make shit up too because I forget a lot of it. And everyone can buzz in when they think I've lied. We're gonna play the lying game. We invented this. It's the lying. It's a game where I lie to you, and along the way we're gonna explain the Electoral College. It'll be fun. This makes sense, right?
You might have heard of something called true or false, but that's different than the lying game, which Virgil invented.
Yeah, this is just me lying. This is kind of what I do. Okay, so here's how it starts. So on the first Tuesday after the first Wednesday in November, there's a day in November where all the people vote. All the people in the country vote. And what they're voting for is electors. And each state, and the District of Columbia, they all have a set number of electors. And they vote for a slate of electors pledged to a single candidate. So if Wyoming goes for Trump, then Trump gets 3 electoral votes. He gets 3 electors. In the Secretary of State or Secretary of Elections for whatever state, they certify that vote. And they say, okay, it was like this slate of electors won. In some fucking day in December, in the first Wednesday after the second Tuesday in December, the electors meet in each state capital and they cast their votes. And then this gets written down in a certificate that gets sent to Congress. In January, the new Congress is sworn in, and the new Congress then counts the electoral votes. Both of the houses meet, the Senate and the House. They all get together. It's all big. They're all friends. And they bring in a box, a mahogany box that has all of those votes that were cast at the state capitals, all of them. And then they're counted on the floor of the House of Representatives in front of all the Congress. And the vice president, as president of the Senate, oversees this whole process. He's in charge of the whole Megillah. It's going to be Mike Pence because this is before the next vice president has been chosen.
It's in good hands. Very excited.
It's in good hands.
Yeah.
It's in good hands. So he's like the speaker of this whole committee of the both houses. So they count the votes, and then once someone gets the majority of the votes, they win. They win the election, and then that's when the new president and vice president are chosen. But here's where it gets tricky. Anyone can object to the counting of the votes, to some aspect of it, as long as there is one member of the Senate and one member of the House who both object. Then Congress will debate it for like 2 hours, and then both houses will vote on it, whether or not to accept the objection. And if this is where it gets complicated, there's no real process, as far as I know, for what happens if the Senate says, yeah, that's bullcrap, we object. And the House says, no, that's not a real objection. We're going to count the votes. As far as I know, there's nothing that actually resolves that situation. Of course, it would not be complicated if everyone just kind of played by the rules and agreed that, okay, whoever gets the most votes will win. But the scuttlebutt right now is that in states like, say, Wisconsin, which has a Democrat governor and a Republican state legislature, that the state legislator will just say, oh, well, Trump actually won. And then they will appoint their own electors, and they will send that to Congress. And then the Republicans in Congress will object to counting the votes of the Biden electors and say, no, it's actually the Trump electors. Like, those are the real ones. The Biden electors are fraudulent. And there's nothing that will resolve that if Congress remains in Republican hands. So did I tell any lies there? Were there lies?
There's one at least major. No, I found that extraordinarily hard to follow, and I'm sure that there were major untruths that I completely missed. But the one that I really want to start out with is that the very beginning, you said that all of the people of the country vote. That's not true. It's like 60% of the eligible population of the country votes.
Well, okay. That's an untruth. You got me.
And also, I think you said the box was mahogany, but I think it's chestnut. So other than that, as far as I know, all true.
Damn, you're good. You're good. Osita, did you get any ones?
I couldn't think of any off the top of my head. I'm bad with dates, so I don't know necessarily about the first Monday of the second Tuesday, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But no, maybe you forgot when the Marshal of the Supreme Court then has to come to Congress with a bald eagle perched on the right shoulder and then certify the election officially.
That's a lie.
An important step.
That's a lie. That's a lie. There's no such thing as a marshal of the Supreme Court.
Wait, are we allowed to lie? Because I was going to suggest they actually have to duel it out in a pistol duel when there is any sort of confusion.
Well, they did that before the 12th Amendment.
Yeah.
That was before they reformed the
around.
process. That's what Hamilton is about.
One thing I would have added that is genuinely true is that if there is a tie, 269 between Biden and Trump, the decision then goes to the House of Representatives, and the vote is by delegation. So even though Democrats control the House by like the raw number of people they have, the vote is by delegation. Republicans control the delegations, and then Trump probably wins a tie.
Yeah, Republicans have like a majority in like 28 state delegations to the House, even though Democrats have an overall majority because, you know, they get all the seats in like California and New York and stuff.
Yeah.
So, Osita, you are kind of the expert here insofar as that you just wrote a piece on this topic a couple of days ago in the New Republic called "What If Trump Loses and Won't Leave?" Oh, sorry, that's not yours. Yours is the ridiculous wargaming of the 2020 election, right?
Yeah.
And something that you talk about that I didn't really know was happening was this transition integrity project, and a couple of other groups who have really played this out. They've literally gamed out these scenarios by appointing individuals, people like, you know, Podesta and other political figures from across the ideological spectrum to play certain roles and really act out all the potentialities. And that's where was the first time I was reading some of the motives, what could actually inspire some of the confusion and stalemating, because before I started reading in these articles, it just seemed like a lot of almost fear-mongering and bloviating from folks like David Brooks, who are writing these pieces saying, well, what if Trump doesn't leave? Trump is someone who doesn't respect norms. What if he loses outright and just won't leave the White House? And those scenarios seemed a little implausible to me, given the schism or lack of affinity, rather, that the armed forces seem to have for Donald Trump. And it seemed like a couple of gaps removed from plausibility.
They're not doing a coup to stop Joe Biden.
Right. Well, that's what a lot of the rhetoric has sounded like, though. But when you talk about these games as they've played out, and as Virgil just described, the way that different sets of electors could be sent by different, like whether a conservative governor and a Democratic legislature could have different reads on who wins and have competing groups of electors, that seems like a much more plausible scenario. Can you tell us a little bit about these Transition Integrity Project people and some of the scenarios they've been working through?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there are two things happening in the background of Democratic politics right now when it comes to planning for November. There is, on the one hand, a group of progressive organizations that's saying, look, we need to make sure that we don't have a repeat of 2000. We need to be sure that we're ready for any legal challenges the Trump administration is going to throw at Biden, to throw out ballots, to stop recounts and that kind of thing. We need to organize protests aimed at, getting the public to understand what's happening and getting the public to, support handing the election to the legitimate winner of the election. That's one end of things. And then you have the Transition Integrity Project, which I think is a group that was started last year. They met, I guess, virtually in June to do a series of war games where they basically plan out or game out different scenarios that they think might happen in November. They had people playing Donald Trump. They had people playing Joe Biden. They had people playing, I guess, the military and the press and the American people and so on. There are different roles designated. So there are about 100 people involved in the group. It's academics. It's some pundits. It's some people who are Democratic operatives. It's some people who've served in government. Some of the prominent names are people like Donna Brazile, John Podesta, Bill Kristol, Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican Party. And so in this one scenario that I wrote about, which was basically exactly what happened in 2016, Joe Biden wins the popular vote, Donald Trump wins the Electoral College, John Podesta played Joe Biden, and John Podesta refused to concede the election. What happened instead was the states of California, Washington, and Oregon threatened to secede from the United States unless Republicans eliminated the Electoral College, eliminated the filibuster, reformed the Supreme Court. Basically, all of these reforms that people talk about all the time on the progressive side. The strategy was, if Republicans and the Trump campaign don't give us these things, we're going to form a country called Cascadia after we secede from the United States. And
Meagan
you just have to deal with that.
Ridiculous.
You should shake your head because it's ridiculous and it's funny, but it's also kind of galling to me. One that like the scenario that seems like one of the most likely scenarios and the scenario that like most closely resembles what happened in 2016 is the one where they devise this kind of ridiculous answer. But also like all of these reforms that they're talking about that they would want to get out of that negotiating is stuff for the most part that Joe Biden opposes, is publicly said is wrong. We shouldn't try to do. And, it's not like these people, for the most part, and I don't know who all is in it, but certainly the most prominent names mentioned here haven't really done anything over the past 4 years to address the Electoral College substantively. There is an actual movement, an actual piece of legislation you can support in the state legislatures that would actually do something about this problem. I write about it in the piece, but there hasn't really been much investment or buy-in from major figures in the Democratic Party on that.
Well, after 2008, when Obama won in what passes for a landslide nowadays, they genuinely thought, well, we're never going to lose the Electoral College again. We've got the Midwest locked down, and like that's it. That's the key to everything. And now it's there's another Republican president who won in the span of 5 elections, 2 out of 5 elections, who won while losing the popular vote by an even bigger margin this time.
Yeah, and then a point that you make, Osita, which is, well taken, is that despite having gone through this exact scenario twice in recent history, that the words Electoral College don't come up in the platform this year, the platform 4 years ago, the platform 4 years before that, the platform. So there is this idea in these war games that they're going to make this big stand, that there's going to be this Herculean, effort to get a team, a bunch of states to secede who are led in this kind of messaging request by Barack Obama to make these grandiose demands of Donald Trump, when there has been little to no effort, at least on the party level, to actually push these reforms or really air them in any meaningful way. So the effort seems, on top of being really implausible, just kind of deeply cynical or hypocritical.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it speaks to a sort of larger pattern of thinking in democratic politics where you envision this sort of grand dramatic moment, this moment of truth. It's like something out of a movie where everything's going to be resolved and Trump is going to be swept away and the good people are going to win. There's always some kind of point at which they think politics will move in their direction as a consequence of a particular event rather than, building public support or, developing a movement or so on. There's always a lust for a particular decision point that everything is going to turn on. And that's why I sort of read these scenarios is embodying that mentality.
I think this is what seems really ridiculous to me about it, is that it seems to echo. Now we're all sort of used to the hashtag resist and the term resistance. So it just goes it doesn't really surprise us anymore. But do you remember when that first emerged? It's like these people were literally referring to themselves in the image of the French partisans. It's so self-aggrandizing, and it's not matched by any actual serious strategy. And the piece of serious strategy that's missing is mass mobilization. The Democrats are actually getting worse and worse at mass mobilization. And they are also referring to themselves in these grandiose terms that would imply leading a mass movement to secede from the United States, because it can't be done at the top level. It has to be, a mass phenomenon.
That's what's so perplexing about this war game, is that the Republicans in the war game, and these weren't Trump people. These were never Trump guys like Michael Steele, right? Who are wargaming as the Republican side. They played for all the marbles, and they win in the scenario. Trump wins again. Doesn't matter what the popular vote is. The Democrats, all they have, led by Podesta or whoever, all they have is, okay, we're just gonna make a futile threat that nobody believes, and we're gonna get some kind of reform. But we still lose. We still lose the election.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing, because the hysteria is, that Trump is going to lose, and that the process will work, and the Congress counts the votes, and they say, well, Trump lost, and then he'll say, no, I'm still president. And everyone's like, "Oh, what the fuck do we do?" Well, no. Once Congress counts the votes and they say, "Well, this guy's the new president," then that's it. On Inauguration Day, they cart his ass out of the White House. That's lunacy to think anything other than that will happen. The question is, with the power that the Republicans have now, and they control the Senate, and they control all of these state houses by huge margins because of gerrymandering in swing states, is what will collectively the Republican Party do to steal the election? Because they've already done that. They did it in 2000. They leveraged a 5-vote majority on the Supreme Court to steal the election in front of everyone's eyes. And everyone went along with it. In 2000, after some legal wrangling in the state of Florida, where the Secretary of State was Katherine Harris and the governor was Jeb Bush, who was George Bush's brother, after some legal wrangling, the Democrats got an order from the Florida Supreme Court to recount all of the votes in every county in the state, hand recounts, to make sure, we know who won the election. And they were about to do that. They were about to meet the deadline for the electors to meet in December. This was right on the eve. There's like 48 hours to that deadline. They were about to finish this gargantuan task of all of these old people counting ballots in Florida. And the result might have been that Al Gore won. And just before they were about to complete the task, the Supreme Court, the Bush campaign went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued an injunction saying, stop counting the votes. They issued an injunction with buying the argument that if they count all the votes and we actually find out who won the election, who really actually won, it would cause irreparable harm to George W. Bush because it might deprive him of the presidency. That was the legal argument. So then both campaigns go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court hands down a decision saying that the recount is not happening. We're going to end the recount. And because at this point, there's no way that they're going to be able to count all those votes by the deadline, because we issued that injunction. It's twisted nonsense logic. And they said in the decision, by the way, this decision cannot be used as precedent for any future decision. They stole that election. And Al Gore said, after reading the decision, okay, we're going to give up. We're not going to beat up the Supremes. That's what he told his guy in charge of the recount. Don't beat up the Supremes. Because he respected the procedure. He thought the procedure is so important. It's so important that this process is legitimate that it's better that the election is stolen from me than to keep fighting on. And it's foolish.
Expecting that Joe Biden will do anything different than that is also foolhardy and silly. I think that the other part of this equation in a situation where Donald Trump also loses, and it's pretty obvious that he loses, where he will try to maintain power, I think is also, I don't know, I find that to be a little ridiculous as well, because I feel like he does not want to be shamed, isn't that? And I feel like that could be a motivating factor in why he would just step down and say, I didn't want to be president anyway. This was really hard. I'm just going to go start my new, TV network or whatever.
Start my podcast.
Yeah, or I'm going to go on the Bad Faith podcast. My number one fans. I don't know, that's another thing that I feel like we're not really considering. But there's obviously another motivator for Trump, and that is potential prosecution after he is no longer the president, which is something that liberals have talked about. But do I believe that the liberals are actually going to try to prosecute him? No. There's plenty of precedent to show that the Democrats are notorious for not looking backwards, but only looking forwards, like not prosecuting the war crimes of the previous administration when Barack Obama had every right and all the energy to do so.
Yeah, this was a subject that came up on our last premium episode on Monday when I listened to Pete Buttigieg's first episode, and he was discussing this exact same thing. And he was asking, what should happen? We all want to respect norms and not have the kind of chaos that America sees itself as exceptional for not having had compared to certain other countries. But also it's like really caught up in this tension with Trump is bad. We want to do the worst thing. And I think the overwhelming kind of norm respecting ethos of the Pete camp won out in that battle, right? And the consensus on the podcast was no, it wouldn't be the right thing to do. It was right to let Nixon walk. It was right to let that Obama didn't try to prosecute anybody for the financial crisis. It's right not to use jail as a measure to hold people accountable, or for specifically they were talking about enhanced interrogation techniques and the failure to prosecute there. So I think you're right. I think it's deeply naive to think that any kind of big courageous act is going to be made, whether it's prosecuting Trump or whether it's a mass secession from the Union. I agree with you, Hasan, that like I get the impression that Trump isn't particularly invested in staying in office as a human being, but there is this argument that's being made that because he fears prosecution, whether or not it's a legitimate fear, that because he fears prosecution, he has added incentive to try to stay in office at any cost. What do folks make of that argument?
Ultimately, this isn't up to Trump himself. I think this is the key thing. Like whatever Trump feels he wants to do, he won't succeed in staying in office if he doesn't have the support of not only people within his circle, but the American military, the Republican Party. Like they're all, Wall Street. Like all of these different forces have to sort of align for him to stay in power if he's lost the election. And it's determined that he lost the election. I think the bigger question, as Virgil said, is before you get to a point where you know who won the election, what do Republicans do to actually screw up the result in the first place? It depends on what we think about when we say the word steal. I mean, I think it's inevitable that there are going to be legal challenges, right? Like if this question of are ballots going to be thrown out? Yes. Like, are there going to be challenges to things that get sent to the Postal Service? Yes. Like the election is, if that's what the election being stolen means, that's what's going to happen. We should just sort of say that straightforwardly. We should be preparing for that, anticipating that. I think there's going to be an epistemological crisis. Like a result is going to come, but I don't think Democrats are going to sort of take it on faith, or Republicans are going to take it on faith. It's just going to be sort of the result. And I don't know that there's going to be that much you can do at that point once the challenges have been resolved and once the count has happened to change that.
Because everyone is going to claim legitimacy.
Yeah.
And they're going to convince you, as Trump convinces you, and I guess people call this gaslighting. I hate that term. As Trump tries to convince you that, yes, what you know about legitimacy is false.
Yeah.
He's a very postmodern president, frankly.
But also beyond Trump, I think people very legitimately will say, well, look, we have this result, but we know the Postal Service has been screwed over. We know that in the best case scenario, if Trump were not, committed to dismantling the Postal Service, if everything was working correctly, we know that there would be screw-ups and mishaps with mail delivery just because that's how it works. And there are ballots that go undelivered and so on. So there's going to be an inherent level of uncertainty built into the process. I think people should just sort of understand. So it's not just going to be Trump saying, well, this result is invalid, we should question this result. I think that the inherent situation we're in is one that's going to lead to people of all political stripes saying, we don't really know for sure what happened. We think our side won. We believe that the other side has done stuff to threaten the integrity of the process, and that's just going to be a mess.
And if you can build enough uncertainty about the process, then it does have to come down to someone, and that might be the Supreme Court, where the Republicans have a majority, where Donald Trump appointed 2 seats on the Supreme Court, where both sides have fashioned an argument why they've legitimately won, and the Supreme Court simply has to decide, well, just who's going to win. It's not like, oh, this is the objective truth of the matter. No. They just have to pick a winner, because that's exactly what they did in the year 2000. And I've read that before the Supreme Court decided Bush v. Gore, Sandra Day O'Connor was at some party in Washington and talking about how she had heard from like Drudge or something that, the Gore people went to nursing homes in Florida and they just had, vegetables, senile people, just like they just hold their hands and like have them vote for Al Gore. And so she just did not believe in the legitimacy of even if Gore had won. And so, we're worse off than we were in 2000. 2000, we looked like a stable country then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, the crazy thing is that after 2016, Trump also questioned the results of that election, even though he won, right? He said the popular vote, Hillary won because they were busing in illegal immigrants to polling centers and this and that place. So it's a certainty that he's going to do all of that, no matter what happens.
So I think the question in my mind is, if Biden wins by a blowout, he puts an exclamation point on it, then okay, there's not going to be any uncertainty, even if you wanted Trump to win. There's going to be a hardcore of like 30% of the country, but it doesn't really matter who think that, oh, the election was stolen, but it doesn't really matter what they think. But if the election is close, if it's within a few points in Wisconsin and Michigan, places like that, where, I mean, the polls indicate that it will probably be within a few points, and that Democrats are more likely to vote by mail, meaning that meaning that on election night, Trump will lead in these states. But over the next few days, his lead will go down, and then Biden will take the lead after they count these votes. Will Republicans accept that, oh, yes, that's simply how mail-in voting works? Or, and when I say Republicans, I mean Republican legislators. Or will they say, no, that's illegitimate. Whoever led on election night won. Like, this is all fraud. And so we're actually going to, like, we're in the Wisconsin legislature, we're going to certify Trump electors, and we're going to send that to Congress. And then Republicans in Congress, Republicans keep the Senate, they will say, okay, we will accept the objection. Is that a plausible scenario?
Yeah, that's a really important part of it. I think the war game scenario, as you wrote about, Osita, and some others as well, that there is this veneer of legitimacy to saying, okay, the ballots are in, and by midnight of election day, it looks like so far Trump is winning. Let's call it. And we all saw in Iowa the power of just calling an election and how difficult it is to reverse that kind of media narrative and inertia. And the person who says, look, wait, let's see, just has a much weaker argument, a much weaker rhetorical argument than the person says declaratively that I've won. And so really imagine the world, the scenario in which, you know, we know that 40% or so of votes are going to come in by mail because of COVID-19, et cetera, that you could really make that kind of a play and have that argument. And when you look at the games that were described, there was a reverse scenario that was described in one of the southwestern states, right? Where there's a world in which there is the political identification of the governor and the legislator are switched. And the Democrats in that scenario argued the exact Republican position for the scenario as it played out in like Pennsylvania. So it doesn't seem like there's a recognition. I mean, there is a recognition rather that it's not about one position being better than the other. It's really about what position you are in and exploiting it to your benefit, which really makes me worry because Democrats seem to be worse historically at selling these kinds of arguments. It's selling these kinds of strategic arguments and really committing to the posture of, no, I won, yes, we're right, and we're going to go to the mat on this, as opposed to kind of deferring to experts in a way that doesn't seem as rhetorically sound or kind of righteous, you know?
I'd say the scenario that keeps me up is they're going to have to count the mail-in votes. And Biden is going to make up his margin through the mail-in votes, probably. Meaning that if Republicans really want to screw this whole process up, if they really want to steal the election, all they have to do is shut down the counting of votes, which is literally what they did in the year 2000. That is exactly how they won the state of Florida. And one of the most famous incidents was the Brooks Brothers riots in Miami-Dade County, where in Miami-Dade was one of the original 4 counties that was doing a full hand recount. And at the elections office in Miami-Dade, Republicans had assembled this crew of demonstrators. It was called the Brooks Brothers riot because they were like dressed. They were like young Republican shitheads dressed in Brooks Brothers attire, and they stormed the elections office and they shut down the counts. They actually did that, and a lot of these guys went on to jobs in the Bush administration and on Capitol Hill. Now, what is going to stop Republicans or these assault rifle sickos like these demonstrators from doing the exact same thing, from going into the elections office in Milwaukee, with their assault rifles and saying, you're not counting any more votes? Who stops that?
Well, I mean, I think that's as I said in the beginning, I think that's where you get these progressive groups that are kind of organizing now to make sure that the votes are counted. You're having people who are saying that there needs to be civil disobedience, disruptive action if it comes to the point where Republicans are actively trying to suppress the counting of votes and so on. I think all of this stuff is kind of very difficult to actually predict and sort of think through in your head before the fact. But one of the sort of the central ideas that informs the way I think about this in general is, for me, and maybe people will disagree, I don't actually think the Republican Party as an institution is that invested in Trump's reelection. I think the Republican Party will do what it can in these kinds of legal battles to make sure Trump comes out ahead. But if he's losing, or if he actually loses, I don't actually think you're going to see a lot of effort being expended, certainly by Republicans in Washington, to cover for Trump and to put him ahead. Because I just don't think that they need him anymore. I really don't think so. And I wrote this in a piece a couple of weeks ago. I just don't think the Republican Party's institutional power depends on having the White House again. Look at what they did when they had Congress for the first 2 years of the Trump administration. They had the full play of everything. And people like me sort of thought, well, that's the end of Social Security. That's the end of Medicare. They're going to destroy the federal government and everything's going to be done. They couldn't pass most of what they wanted to do, in part because they've reached a point in conservative policy where the people that they're actually hurting when they do stuff like that are people in the Republican base. It's not just, you can imagine that you're hurting some black person in a city somewhere by doing this or that cut. To the extent that that's still happening, it's happening at the executive level. But these large legislative policy items that they wanted to accomplish, they didn't do them. I think that they didn't do them because they've reached a limit on what the public is willing to accept on the national level from Republican politicians. And so they've reached into this kind of culture war, spite-based politics where they're not actually seeking to accomplish very much of anything. But if Republicans really wanted Trump to be reelected, like they would have passed a better coronavirus stimulus package, that they passed so far. They'd be supporting actual measures to revive the economy and not just sort of this pilling bullshit that they keep putting forward. I don't think the average congressman who's in a safe seat and who's not facing reelection, or the average Republican senator in like Kansas or South Dakota, is really that invested in putting something together because their career depends on the outcome of the election, right? I think that the whole thing kind of rolls on and moves on even if Trump loses. So that's just kind of the way that I think about it. I just think that this is what happens when you have a movement and you have institutional power. Like you can afford to lose the White House and still tell yourself, well, look, like the Senate is biased in our favor. Joe Biden's a guy who doesn't want to do anything to change the existing power structure that will actually allow Democrats to pass anything, even if they do win. So we can kind of rest easy. We have all of these judges that we've already appointed during the Trump administration. We have the Supreme Court. We have gerrymandering. We have all of these kinds of structural advantages that are going to prevent Democrats from doing much of what they want, even if they win the election.
What you're saying is that it's good that Bernie lost because otherwise we'd have a Trump coup.
Oh, I don't know that I would say that. I don't know that I would say that. But I do think that it's worth thinking sort of broadly about what the incentives are for the different actors here and the extent to which the Republican Party's future actually depends on Trump being reelected. I don't know what their agenda is if he's reelected. I don't know. And especially if he takes power in this kind of dramatic way. Like, what do you actually accomplish if you do this coup and the entire, everybody who is in civil service in Washington, D.C. is basically like a centrist or a Democrat. Like, you're not going to be able to, the government will not function in that scenario, as far as I'm concerned.
I feel like Republicans are hungry for power across the board. It doesn't really matter. Plus, you have RBG definitely retiring in the next 4 years. So that's another Supreme Court seat, like more opportunities. Like Trump, between now and inauguration, even if Trump loses, there aren't really any more judge appointees that he could stack the courts with because he's already done all of that. So I agree with you. But the next 4 years would still provide additional opportunities for lower court appointees and also the Supreme Court. So there's certainly a lot of areas, in my opinion, and you are a lot better read and much smarter than I am on all of this. So I don't, you'll probably own me in this, but I do feel like Republicans will always, no matter what, fight to win because there's always opportunities to destroy the federal government.
Meagan, I'm curious what your take on Osita's position is.
I was thinking about this point that was raised about a counterfactual where Bernie was potentially going to be the one in the White House if it's not Trump. And I do think that you'd see much stronger consolidation and commitment from the Republican Party to stopping that from happening. Conversely, though, you wouldn't see the strength from the Democratic Party establishment in pushing back. But then there's another valence to this, which is that I actually think that most people people who are planning to vote for Joe Biden are not enthusiastic about him, and he doesn't have that kind of mass energy behind him. So in this counterfactual scenario where you had Bernie potentially headed to the White House, the Democratic Party would be more hands-off, but there would be more of a potential for civil disobedience and some kind of like mass energy around, because it would be positive, not just negative, which is to say it would be about, changing the status quo rather than simply stopping a bad thing from continuing to happen. So my brain is kind of stuck on this counterfactual, which I hadn't considered before. But I think actually thinking through the ramifications of the thing that's not happening helps us understand the dynamics of the thing that is happening.
I would like to get to our next segment. Meagan recently wrote about California's Prop 22 for the pages of Jacobin magazine, which, by the way, turns 10 today. Happy birthday, Meagan and Jacobin.
I turned 10 today. That's right.
Meagan, would you please walk us through what's happening in California?
Yeah, so it starts with the passage of AB 5 last year. This was a bill that restricted the definition of independent contractors in a way that made it so that Uber and Lyft and other delivery and rideshare companies could no longer do what they do, which is misclassify their employees, their gig worker employees, and not give them things like healthcare or pay them, minimum wage, protection against discrimination, all kinds of things that, with the working class won over the course of a century, which just don't apply to this group of workers because they're supposedly independent contractors. So AB 5 restricted the definition of independent contractors to exclude them. Uber and Lyft basically ignored this for the better part of a year. And last month, a judge in California mandated that they comply by AB 5. They kicked and screamed. They threatened a capital strike. If you don't know what a capital strike is, it's essentially, how workers can withdraw their labor and go on strike. Capitalists can withdraw their investment and go on strike that way. And it sort of damages the regional economy, and it forces politicians to cater to their whims. And so they threatened to do this. And basically another judge came along and said, okay, well, you have until October to comply. And so they're in an existential battle right now. Their entire business model is predicated. Their entire business model. I mean, literally, they don't exist. There's nothing that they're doing. They're sort of like trying to mystify it with basically the idea that they've introduced some, new technology, and that's true. But the actual business model itself is that they are cutting down on labor costs by misclassifying employees. And so in the state of California, they want to continue to do that. And so they've put all of their eggs in a new basket, which is Prop 22. And this is a ballot measure that the people of California are going to have to decide. And so this is really a life or death battle for these companies. It's not just Uber and Lyft, it's also DoorDash, Instacart, companies like this. So collectively, those four companies, including Postmates, but Postmates was bought by Uber, they've put over $100 million into the campaign for Prop 22. The money has gone to buy really, really expensive consultants. Apparently, they've brought on 18 consulting firms. Several of them have track records with the Republican Party almost exclusively, and with other corporations that are seeking to weasel out of regulations. So like the tobacco industry, the styrofoam and plastics. So these are the kinds of people that they're bringing in to run the Yes on 22 campaign in California. It's one of the most expensive ballot measures in history. And what are they doing with this? This was what I wanted to highlight in the story that I wrote for Jacobin. It's just, first of all, that whole thing is, we can talk about that. But there's another detail that I wanted to highlight in my story for Jacobin, which is that the expensive consultants that they've hired, who presumably are the best in the country, or at least the most ruthless in the country, because again, this is a life or death battle for some of the biggest corporations in the country. They have been exposed in the process of orchestrating mass online pile-ons, including online harassment and even doxing of individual critics of Prop 22 on Twitter, for example. I can explain the story if you like, or you can just go read it in Jacobin.
Who are these people? Are these the Bernie Bros? Is this their new gig?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. The people who do the online harassment, you're familiar with them, the Bernie Bros.
Yeah,
So they've been hired to, no, of course. I mean, that was my thought. That was my thought. Like, I was like, I never want to hear about Bernie Bros ever again after reading this story. And my other thought was, surely this is not the first time. This is not, the consultants on this campaign have been exposed in the process of doing this. This is not their first rodeo. They're not pioneering this technique right now. And it made me think back to the Democratic Party primary online, which all of us were there for. We all witnessed and we all experienced.
All online.
And you've got to wonder which consulting firms were, brought in by which actors to lead individual targeted harassment. I don't think that any of that was coming from the Bernie corner. I can't imagine it. But, you can imagine that it went the other way.
Well, that's what I always wonder about online. I meet a crazy person and I think, okay, is this person being paid or are they just crazy? Because they've got all this, I'm with Mayor Pete crap in their bio. And it's like, that's not normal.
It makes you sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I think we're reaching the point, especially with this story about Prop 22, where we need to stop assuming or implying that it's crazy tinfoil hat stuff to ask whether people are part of an online paid harassment campaign to sway public opinion. I mean, we have solid proof this is happening in California right now.
Well, right. I mean, these are the bots or the people in the Saudi Arabian orb factory or the Moscow, Russian trolls who are influencing our elections. Of course, I don't care about that stuff because they're weird and they're bad at what they do. This is way more potent stuff. Like you're
really
explicitly strike busting, with using online harassment. That's a way bigger crisis than whatever Iran, North Korea hysteria stuff.
I think people should go, if they get a chance to go read the story, to actually see the mechanics of how it works. Because I do think that we on the left should try to develop an intuition about whether that kind of thing is happening or not, whether we're witnessing regular internet outrage, which, by the way, definitely exists and actually is the majority of what you see and is the very thing that these consultants are exploiting. They've watched it happen. They know that it works and they're using it for their own ends, but it's an organic phenomenon on its own. So we need to be able to we need to learn those sort of, warning signs of whether or not this kind of thing is happening, because the purpose of it is to shut down individual critics of right-wing policy, of anti-worker policy, of, anti-worker candidates and so on.
So how do we handle this though? Because there is this catch-22 where sometimes I feel like the thing that they hated about the Bernie bros was that no one had to pay people to be enthusiastic about Bernie, right? Not the existence of a mass of people who would fight for certain ideological touchstones or what have you, but the fact that other people were trying for the same thing. I think we've all read the reporting that's come out about both how the Bernie bro phenomenon was not empirically validated and how the K-Hive was another one of these paid efforts to do this kind of mass targeting on harassment, right? And so it seems like it's obvious that this kind of thing is real, that let's say, bot armies and things are real. At the same time, there are all of these instances in which people weaponize the threat of bots or the ideas of bots to undermine real movements that exist, right? So there was an organic backlash against Kamala Harris for her criminal justice record that you saw uniformly across YouTube videos, et cetera, from the second that she became a potential candidate, that was dismissed as, oh, these are Bernie bros, at the same time that you have the K-Hive. You have all of the Russian bot hysteria, some of which is just human beings and some of which is not. I don't think there's a person on this panel who hasn't been called a Russian bot or an asset or something at some point in their life. It's basically a birthmark for leftists. So how do we talk about these things and label these things without feeding into narratives that would undermine movements that are supportive of the left?
It's a really good question. Here's an analog that maybe that can help us think through this question. So historically, on the left has been infiltrated by state actors that want to destabilize the left and derail its political project, FBI, CIA, and so on. And the best advice that I've ever heard for how to go about handling that situation is to accept that you're never going to know who's an infiltrator, who's a state actor, and who's not, who's just behaving, in a way that's actually destabilizing and derailing in a really organic way. And to know that the state actors, are actually emulating what the latter are doing, because they watch that and they see and they say that works really well to destabilize these people. Let's just press those buttons some more. So you're never going to know, and you can drive yourself really crazy trying to figure out which is which. And
I'm good at telling who's CIA. If you need to know who's CIA, just ask me.
So I guess I would say that the lesson there is to not drive yourself crazy trying to figure out which is which, while at the same time it's like walking a tightrope, knowing that whether it's organic online outrage or it's paid consultants trying to dox and expose and character assassinate people to get them to shut up, you need to develop an internal set of internal resources to resist going absolutely nuts or getting intimidated into silence, which are the two things that they're actually trying to accomplish if they are in fact being paid to destabilize you. I mean, the purpose of this is to psychologically torment you so that your energy is not spent doing the thing that you're being very effective doing, and to make you afraid to speak out. So whether it's organic or artificial, we all need to be working on developing a kind of like a resolve online to not get sucked into this stuff and not get derailed by this stuff.
I think there's two factors here that, at least in my cursory investigation into this measure, I found that we're not really thinking about as well, which is, one, there are so many like multi-level marketing pyramid scheme freaks that also end up doing Uber because they're like the up and coming day trader entrepreneur who's just like doing Uber to survive just for now, but like he's got that temporarily embarrassed millionaire mentality and, you know, a YouTube channel to go along with it. So all these like DoorDash YouTubers, and there is definitely an entire network of people like this that like work on Uber and give you tips on how to become a better Uber driver and stuff like that. A lot of these guys are definitely on the side of the corporations in this battle, and I don't think that's an accident. There's probably some paid promotion there as well. But then the other factor that I always think about whenever we look at like labor disputes in America, especially, is that I feel like the broader electorate are consumers first and foremost. I mean, they'll go and storm state capitals because they can't go to Applebee's on Fridays, you know, and that's the only meaning for existence for a lot of Americans. And I feel like the messaging battle for securing workers' rights for contracted employees, contractors, in all of these massive American corporations, the messaging battle is much more significant and much harder to fight when Uber says Uber's going to be too expensive for you, or Lyft is going to be too expensive for you now. You're not going to be able to get Postmates and with the same convenience that you were able to, because that actually does harm the consumers, and then that's all they think about because they're selfish. And I always worry that that's going to be a bigger problem in this situation, on top of like the obvious harassment.
This is what they're counting on. Targeted online harassment is a phrase that I've started to just like tune out, because usually it's directed at like us for like having opinions on the internet. But I mean, in this case, that's genuinely what's happening. But what's really important, the important detail, and something that you touched on, Hasan, is that it's riling up real people. That's the point. It's not like an army of paid bots. It's like a specific targeted action that's intended to rile up real people and to sway their opinion and get them to do things to shut down critics. In this case, the that's where their Twitter clicks, and they all have cute little names, and often they're appropriating, usually when somebody said something bad about them. Everybody knows this. This is how it happens. This group of pro-Prop 22, anti-AB5 people, and they're real people, call themselves the Lollipop Guild, and it's a reference to a quote from the author of the bill that was sort of like she put her foot in her mouth or something, and they seized on it. But these are real people, and they actually are thinking along the lines of what Hasan is talking about. And so that's what makes these kinds of actions on the part of consultants really effective, is because they don't actually have to pay for large numbers of fake accounts to do it. They have to set things in motion with real people. That's actually what they're relying on.
So how do we win the posting wars?
How do we win the posting wars?
Yeah, we have to win the posting wars, because of course the liberal view is, okay, we're gonna ask to speak to the manager of Twitter and have those accounts be banned. But that's that's not an easy thing to do. That's a whole process. How do we just win it?
I have no idea. I mean, look, I this morning I was on the Jacobin podcast, The Vast Majority, with Micah Utricht and Matt Christman, and we were talking about more or less this. And the motto that we settled on is that even if we can't log off with our fingers, the left has to be on social media. We have to actually be out there promoting our ideas. Otherwise, we just cede that terrain to our opponents. But you do have to log off in your heart. This is the motto that we settled on. You have to log off in your heart. You can't let it consume you. You have to develop some kind of critical distance between yourself and your avatar, or else they're going to win. And they're getting smarter. They our opponents, our political opponents, are getting a lot smarter. They know what gets under our skin. They watch us do it to ourselves, so they know exactly how it works, and they're good at just simulating it. So we're going to have to evolve as well to not let it get under our skin, I guess.
Well, they've never owned me. No more leftists infighting, but they've never owned me. They've never owned any of us.
Well, it's because you guys are part of the chop with a fash pipeline, obviously.
We're good. We're
that's
no,
why.
we're secure. We are a secure forward operating base in the posting wars.
No corn cobs on bad faith.
I think we've run over. I think we should wrap it up here.
Yes, thank you all so much for all the time you spent and all of your edifying comments and insights. I think that this is the most clarity that I've ever had about a lot of these topics. The David Brooks column didn't quite get me there, but Osita, yours did. And Meagan Day, always a pleasure. And thank you so much for hosting us, Hasan.
Thank you, Hasan.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. This was awesome.
And you can find Osita Nwanevu. You can find his writing at The New Republic. You can find Meagan Day at Jacobin. You can find Hasan Piker at twitch.tv/HasanAbi. Right?
No.
Oh, no.
No,
Oh.
HasanAbi. My username is different everywhere. Twitch.tv/HasanAbi on Twitch, but that's my Twitter. Hasan the Hun is my Twitter.
And if you're watching this on Twitch or listening to this free episode of Bad Faith, join the faithful and subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast.